This program was created in part utilizing the Sound Collection Lab located in the History, Social Sciences, Philosophy Department on the campus of the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith. The views expressed herein do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of History, Social Sciences, Philosophy, or its faculty, or the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith.
Hey, this truck like it's getting ready to move here. I couldn't see if it was him or not.
I'll see Mr. Interstate.
Hey, can you stay with police real quick?
10-4, 12.
And welcome back to Bill Hollenbeck Beyond the Badge. We certainly appreciate you coming on board. And if you don't mind, always like and subscribe the channel if you like our content. Of course, this interview is being conducted at the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith at the Sound Collection Lab. I have my trusty co-host, Professor Kevin Jones, here with me. So thanks for braving the cold. This is being filmed on January the 29th. And when I walked out to the car,
31st.
I think or 31st, thank you. Walked out to the car, it was 13 degrees outside. So it was a little chilly. So
Snowpocalypse.
it was. We barely survived that. But hey, on today's episode, man, I'm so very excited and quite frankly blessed to have a very special good friend of mine, also a mentor. We talked a little bit about him when Sheriff Brown was on board here with us.
Right.
And it's retired Sheriff Tim Helder. Tim, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you.
It's my pleasure.
All right. So
Glad to have you.
as we normally do with our guests, we kind of embarrass them a little bit and kind of read a little about their law enforcement or their history career. But Sheriff Tim Helder began his career in law enforcement in 1979 as a dispatcher for the Washington County Sheriff's Department, and later also worked as a field patrol deputy for Washington County. In 1982, he was hired by the Fayetteville Police Department and rose to the rank of deputy chief before retiring in 2003. And in 2003, he returned back home to the Washington County Sheriff's Office as the chief deputy. And then in January 2005, he took a major leap of faith and went through the ringer and was eventually elected as sheriff of Washington County. During his tenure as the sheriff in Washington County, and I believe, Tim, you're the longest standing sheriff so far in recent history. Is that correct?
In the history of Washington County.
In the history of Washington County.
Congratulations and thank you.
That is an amazing feat. It really is. And while you were sheriff, you moved dispatched to the new detention center. You also had the challenge of transferring the detainees from the old jail to the new detention center. During his first year in office, he increased the number of employees by 50% to accommodate the new facility. In 2006, they renovated the new facility, increasing the capacity by 100 beds. Also, during his tenure with the sheriff's office, he started and he joined area law enforcement agencies and brought them together and assisting and helping to create several different types of task forces, everything from immigration to drug interdiction, internet crimes against children, and sex offender task force. Also, Tim was a leader statewide with the Arkansas Sheriff's Association, where he also rose to the head, the president of the Sheriff's Association. So again, man, that's an amazing career. A lot of people don't know about that, and it's the whole purpose of our podcast is to kind of highlight, some lost history of what our law enforcement heroes have done for our state.
Lifetime of service.
Absolutely, a lifetime of service. That's exactly right. So again, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you.
You bet.
So it was we met the other day and had lunch, and we kind of touched a little bit. But Tim has an interesting childhood where he it had some challenging moments in his life that he had to persevere that I think are pretty interesting. One, of course, is being and correct me if the age that you were at, but you were about 5 years of age when you first witnessed domestic abuse. Is that correct?
You've done a lot of research
I have, absolutely.
between you and Kevin. We try. You brought up some stuff I didn't remember. I do remember this.
Yeah.
So, just a brief history. I'm from a law enforcement background, basically, but at that point in my life, my mom worked at the Los Angeles Police Academy as a waitress, and so she would get up in the morning, 3:30, head to work to do the breakfast shift, and a friend of hers, Joyce Mazzella, would come to pick my sister and I up and take us to school. My sister was 10 years older than I was. I was 5.5 at the time. And on this particular day, I was my usual pre-school routine. I was back in the den and I was watching Captain Kangaroo. And
show.
hey, man,
It was awesome.
come on. And then my sister was in the kitchen getting lunch ready and whatever. And then Joyce came wheeling in and she ran through the door, slammed it, which got my attention. And so I came out from the room, and if you can picture this, the front door, there's a little foyer and then 2 little halls running off to the sides. Well, I was on one side, and I remember looking across, and my sister was on the other, and Joyce was leaned against the front door screaming to us to get back. And then about that time, we heard more wheels squealing in the driveway, and somebody came up banging on the door, and then the next thing happened, somebody shot through the door, knocked Joyce to the ground, and or laying right in the foyer between my sister and I. And then he kicked the door in and then shot 4 more times. And fortunately, I suppose he ran out of ammo. He just had a look on his face, just kind of in a daze. Not even sure he ever looked at me. When I looked up, my sister was nowhere to be found. She's supposed to be taking care of me, you know.
Thank you, sis.
I still remind her of that today. At any rate, Hank was his name, Hank Mazzella. He turned around and just walked away. And then the next thing, you know, the ambulance and everything's going on. They hunted for him for 3 days and eventually found him in the desert. He'd committed suicide, but he just lost his mind somewhere along the way. And these are lifelong friends of my parents, you know, so it was kind of a deal.
Yeah, that's horrifying for somebody at that age. So did she survive or did she die?
She actually survived. She lived to be in her mid-80s, believe it or not, and she went through I don't know how many surgeries.
Sure.
All 5 of the bullets went into her abdomen area.
Goodness.
So they had to do a lot of, you know, cutting and sewing and kind of putting her back together. But, you know, that was my first exposure to domestic violence, I suppose you could say.
Gosh, that's at that age, that seriously, that has to be horrifying. But
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned one time the majority of crimes happen somebody you know.
right?
Right?
Oh yeah, crimes against persons. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And I picture that crime scene, and for her to be shot like that, I would imagine she's probably holding the door, trying to keep him from coming in to potentially harm her and y'all. And so, kind of, I don't know, heroically, she's trying to hold the door, and she's getting shot through the door. Wow.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Crazy stuff. So, also, your father was an LAPD officer. Is that correct?
You want to hear that whole story?
Heck yeah, I do.
Well, I don't know how much time you've got.
Hey, we got all the time.
You
in
know,
the
I
world
got a
with you,
lot
pal.
going on up here. But so I'll try and make this as brief as I can. But my mom's folks met in Rich Hill and Butler, Missouri, which is if you go up 71 on the way to Kansas City, that's where her side of the family came from. My grandfather moved to Southern California to go to work for his uncle. Pre-Depression, Depression time, you know, looking for work as a painter. And he eventually summoned my grandmother, they weren't yet married. They got married in California, and then they started their family there. My grandfather later became a policeman for Los Angeles. He had an uncle that worked there as well, and he had recruited my grandfather. So my grandfather worked 20 years almost to the day as a patrolman, a footbeat guy. I've got pictures of him on horseback, the whole mounted patrol group at the academy.
Cool is that?
It's so great, those memories. Well, now we're going to fast forward to when my mom is a young lady, and she has started dating who would soon become my father. And so my grandfather, having intimate information and knowledge of South LA, he kind of pulled my dad aside at one point and said, "Robert, I know that you're getting pretty serious with my daughter, and I think you need to know that I know something about you." And he said, "What's that, sir?" And he said, "I happen to know your dad, Buck Helder, and he runs a barbershop in South LA. "Yes, sir." "And I also know that he runs a booking operation in the back of the barbershop. And Bob, I've been told that you're running book for him. And if your intentions are true and you want to marry my daughter, we have openings at the Los Angeles Police Department. I would highly recommend you apply." So my dad did, and he had a great career. He worked his way through the ranks, retiring as lieutenant detective of homicide, and so I'm third generation
Wow,
law
how cool is
enforcement.
that? Also, Kevin, his dad was, I think, directly involved in the Charles Manson investigation, is that and murders with
Helter
Sharon
Skelter.
Tate. Is that correct?
Yep, Sharon
Yeah.
Tate.
Wow.
And also the La Bianca murders. We forget
Right.
about that, but
Yeah.
they were another family
Right.
that was murdered
Yeah.
by the Manson
That's right.
crew. And so my dad was over that whole process. And then also they were first on the Robert Kennedy assassination, Sirhan Sirhan.
At
Sirhan.
the Ambassador
Wow.
Hotel, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They tore that down a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Anyway.
That's interesting. That really is. I'd love to see some of those pictures of your grandfather.
Yeah.
That would be
So
some
he
neat-
investigated the Kennedy.
They were first on scene. Of course, they eventually had to relinquish the investigation, Secret Service and whatnot.
Right,
Mhm.
right. So
Crazy.
is
Crazy
your
situation.
is your father still alive?
No, my dad's been gone. Let's see, my youngest daughter is 33, and she was 1.
Okay.
So I guess 32 years.
Okay, gone
He's been
32
gone.
years.
Mhm.
Wow. So trying to do the short math here. So obviously he did live and see you become a law enforcement officer, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. And what a great opportunity through the years that I had to pick up the phone when I was in investigations and running the unit, and to have the ability to call my dad and just say, "Hey, I'm looking at this deal, and I can't," and he would just kind of talk me through it. And probably bigger influence for me during that time is when I started promoting, and I would get so frustrated, going from investigations, which I loved, into the realm of leadership and
Administration.
Management.
yes. And what I felt like at the time, you've yanked me out of something I loved, and you've made me a glorified babysitter. Well, I'd call my dad. I can remember this phone call. I had gone from detective division to afternoon shift, and I said, "Dad, I don't like this. I think I've made a mistake, and all I'm doing is paperwork." And my dad, he just said, "Get over it, man." He said, "Look, if you want to be in a position to control outcomes, have a position to where you're sharing the vision of the future of the police department, you're shaping and molding men and women." He said, "What do you just want to be a detective the rest of your life, or do you want to be part of that?" And it kind of
Good
clicked
point.
at that point.
Yeah.
Leadership,
Bigger
and,
mission.
Yeah.
so, but yeah, I miss those conversations.
I imagine you do.
Yeah.
That's what a blessing to be able to call your dad.
Yeah.
I've just going down a different path for just a second.
Sure.
I'm getting to experience that just a little bit, where my son-in-law Stephen, who's working for Fayetteville, or my son now, who's working for Fayetteville PD, will occasionally call me and ask me about this or talk about this, and you get to kind of insert a little bit of advice. And it's not because we're smarter; it's just because we made those mistakes, and that's what creates a little bit of wisdom. So that is, for me, I mean, I guarantee how great it was for you. I can guarantee you, for him, it was a great experience for him that you would call him and seek advice as well. So that's pretty cool. I like that. So you're grown up in L.A., or in the L.A. area, and then you eventually come to Arkansas. How did that happen?
So, Bill, let's see, mom and dad divorced not too long after that shooting incident, maybe within a year or so. And when I was 8, this has nothing to do with what you asked, but I'm going to throw it in there anyway. I was kind of a latchkey kid. I told you my mom worked at the academy, and my sister and I, she was in charge of me basically, and kind of started hanging out with a guy next door who happened to be a pyromaniac, and he kind of showed me the cool stuff about burning paint thinner, and stuff that you could burn oil off the garage floor. I mean, it was amazing. I was 8 years old and fascinated.
Cool, man.
So I guess we were experimenting for about a month, and on this one fateful day, I don't know if you're familiar with housing in Southern California, but the houses are like 6 feet apart, and they got a little fence in between them. So I don't know what we were doing, burning ants or something. I don't know that day. But anyway, I was climbing over the fence to go back into my backyard. And the next thing I know, I've got this something to hit me in the back. Well, as it turns out, he had a little coffee can of paint thinner that he lit on fire and threw it on me as I was climbing over. So the next thing I remember is falling off of this fence, and I take off running, fortunately around the front of his house and not mine. And his mom just happened to be walking out at that time. And I guess she saw me, the running Roman candle, and she knocked me down, rolled me up. In the hospital for about a month, 7 skin graft operations. For about the first week, they didn't know if I was blind or not. It just basically burned off the front part of my face, my eyelashes, my hair, everything. Well, but anyway, long story short, was able to see, but as part of that incident, then I think we started looking to relocate. And we did that. We moved to another part outside of Los Angeles, in Pomona was the name of the city. We were there for about, mom remarried, and we were there for about a year. I was in 7th grade at Fremont Junior High, about 3,000 kids in the junior high. This would have been in 70. And, 69, 70, we'd had the Watts riots and a lot of different stuff going on. Right. And that year we had 2 racial riots within a junior high school. I mean, massive deals. Very scary for my folks, I know. So they started looking. My mom and stepdad started looking for ways to relocate. At the time, he was selling carpet for Sears or something. We came to Arkansas on vacation the summer of 71 and to see some friends in Farmington, Arkansas. Right. And then he applied for relocation and eventually got that. That's how we ended up in Arkansas. He relocated. We rented a house for a while in West Fork and eventually bought a house. And I've been in West Fork ever since.
Wow. So you went to junior high and then high school in West Fork.
That's right.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then after high school, you met somebody who kind of was, I think, pointed you in the direction of the sheriff's office. Is that correct?
Well, I think I know what you're alluding to, but there was a lot in between the 8th grade and my senior year.
Well, let's hear it.
We call that development.
Well,
the origin story.
I know that I told you my dad and my grandfather were both law enforcement, right. But I promise you that was the furthest thing from my mind. Early on, of course, I had the 10 code memorized and all that kind of stuff and was enamored with it. But when we moved out here, I got involved in sports and church and my friends and the typical teenage stuff. But in order to get me to the point where I was even interested or would consider a career in law enforcement, my coaches and my teachers had a huge influence on me. My church and the men and women at my church. It takes a village, they say.
Sure.
Well, that's kind of the way it was with me. I had a lot of influencers in my life. I got to tell part of this to lead into that because because of this, you would think I would never have done this. But as a teenager, I was pretty awesome. I thought, pretty cool athlete. Mm-hmm. Had a 1970 Plymouth Duster with tires about that wide on it, and it would run. So a good buddy of mine, who really was a stud athlete, we were driving and hot rodding, and I slid through a 4-way stop in West Fork. Of course, that's all we had. No stoplights and one four-way stop. And I'm zipping through there, middle of the day. I hop the railroad tracks, kind of like the Dukes of Hazzard, and I look in my rearview mirror, and here comes the Gray Ghost, is what we called it. A one cop town.
Yeah.
Paul Muller was the chief, and I saw those blue bubble lights, kind of giving it this, and he came over I can still see this. He came over the railroad tracks, how the shock, and, vroom, vroom, and I said, hey, John, yeah, I said, I think we're getting ready to get pulled over again. And because this guy had stopped us for similar incidents probably 5 or 6 times and kept warning me and warning me and warning me. So I thought it was going to happen again. So I pulled over into the Assembly of God parking lot and, got my cocky attitude on. And Paul walks up to the window and he says, how many times we had this conversation, Tim? And I said, a lot. And he said, I need you to step out of the car. And I said, do what? And he said, I need you to step out of the car. I said, okay. So I step out and he said, now put your hands on the car. And I said,
Uh-oh.
You serious? And he said, put your hands on the car. And so I did. Well, next thing I know, I'm in the back of his car in handcuffs. And my buddy, John Schuster, has to drive my car. Well, I end up, Bill, in the drunk tank at the Washington County Sheriff's Office, where I spent the next 2.5 hours.
And you're what, 18, 17, 18?
17. Well, how else do you think I got to be sheriff? This was in my juvenile record, right? But anyway, so, and that will lead into another story after our break about Paul Muller, the chief at West Fork, how I was introduced into law enforcement and how that all kind of came together. Let me clarify. I was in the drunk tank.
Okay.
But I wasn't drunk.
Good.
It was reckless driving.
Sure.
But it might as well have been.
Yeah.
Because it felt like
so
that.
I would imagine there are a few drunks in the tank with you.
I
Do you remember that at all? Or?
I don't. I just remember it being pink and gross and concrete everywhere.
Oh.
And it was still that way years later when I went to work there. But I do remember that.
Well, you don't want it to be an inviting place anyway, right?
Oh, absolutely.
That's right. That's right. And I remember I was still had an attitude big time. And I know that I called my dad. You get your one call.
Yeah.
I called him, and then he wanted to talk to the arresting officer, so he talked to him. And of course, then I got to talk to my dad again, and he said, "Oh, they're gonna get you out," that kind of stuff. But I know that the conversation with Paul was like, "You just do whatever you got to do.
Yeah, let's
you
just
throw
let
the
him
key
sit
away
here
if
for a
you
while.
need to,
Yeah,
but let's make him think."
Yeah.
So anyway, that's part of my history. And then I was 17. Then the part in between there, and when I actually did go to work for the sheriff's office was it was just life. Life's messy. I got married fairly early, high school sweetheart kind of deal. Was trying to go to the university. I was going to the university, but I was working 3 jobs, driving a school bus, working at the country club, doing stuff, building fence. And, I was in a bad place. I owned a home and had a baby on the way. And I felt like I was not only financially close to bankruptcy, but emotionally and everything else. It was just the world, the weight, and at the time, my Sunday school teacher, I was 20 years old, fast forwarding from 17 to 20. My Sunday school teacher was the chief deputy for the sheriff's office at the time. His name was Ray Ward, and he was the chief deputy for Herb Marshall, who was the sheriff back then. And he knew that we were struggling, and I may have said, at some point, I gotta go to work, a real job and get some benefits, and because I was going to school to be an educator. I kind of go back to what I told you. The influencers in my life were my coaches, my teachers, and people in church, and I wanted to be like them. I wanted to make a difference doing what they were doing with me. But anyway, he said, Tim, I know you're struggling, and would you be interested in coming to work at the sheriff's office and have an opening for dispatch?
Right.
And I'm like, I don't even know what that is, but I'm interested, And he said, well, let's do this, get you an application, and I'll set up an interview with the sheriff. So that all happened. And I go in before the sheriff, then Herb Marshall, and he interviewed me. Here I am, a 20-year-old kid, and I know the only thing he's got on me is references from my coaches and teachers, and that I've spent time in his jail. You know, so I'm like, I got no shot at this, you know, and I don't know, for whatever reason, he saw something in me and offered me the job.
Wow.
And years later, Bill, when I was doing interviews with new hires, I would always go back to this point in my life and just say that, you know, for whatever reason, he took a chance on me, but I didn't even know what I was getting into, really. I knew what law enforcement was, don't get me wrong, but this dispatch thing and all that. Within 30 minutes of setting my hind end in that chair and being exposed to these great men and women that are involved in law enforcement, and then being on the receiving end of those calls where people are just, they need help. You know, there's just all kinds of stuff going on. Within 30 minutes, I was hooked for life.
Hook, line, and sinker.
But, you know, it's hard to explain, you know, because the people that get it, the people that it is a calling for them, it's like you're working, but you don't realize you're working because you're really enjoying what you're doing.
Yeah,
So.
doing what you love.
Yeah.
Gosh, that is so daggum true.
Sheriff Marshall passed away recently, and you mentioned that he was highly ethical and professional. How did he influence your leadership?
Well, early on, I think that I just absolutely looked up to him because of his bearing. You know, he had movie star looks and charisma. He really did. At 15, he was in the Marines. You know, I mean, he was a war veteran, a true hero. You know, and so I don't know. I looked up to him and I saw that how he treated me as a kid. You know, that had no experience. Why would you even know my name? You know, but I would say early on that it was just the way he treated people that worked for him and his charisma, you know, that was probably my early influence with him.
Man, that's a great story. It really is. A lot of people, you know, some of the unsung heroes within law enforcement, detention deputies, dispatchers, communication officers like that. I mean, the job that they do is just is amazing. I mean, it could just be a slow night, and all of a sudden that 911 call comes through, and there's somebody screaming and yelling, needing help on the other end, and you have to take, I guess, a kind of a command presence over the telephone to try to draw the information out and send the proper assistance that you might need and so forth. And then once they hang up, then you're done. And it's like you know, some of the dispatchers I've talked to, they feel a little frustrated because, well, we don't know the true outcome, what happened on that call and so forth. And then you got to shut it off and you got to go home. You know, then they have families and so forth. So it's a challenging job. And our dispatchers and 911 operators, they do definitely an amazing job.
Absolutely.
So, how long were you a dispatcher for the sheriff's office?
So I went to work August 13th, 1979. Okay. I was 20. My birthday's in January. So,
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Yeah. 6'7", 6'7". What's that mean?
48.
It's an age for me. Yeah. 6'7". Anyway, so dispatch from then until I turned 21 in January, and then the sheriff said, we're going to get you to the academy, first opening, and that happened to be in March. Just thinking about dispatch, I don't know what it looked like in Fort Smith or down in Texas when you were working, but the dispatch center, we were in an old building, like in the basement of down below the courthouse, and it kind of came across. So there was parking underneath, and you could walk in as public down after hours, down through the garage, and then you'd come to a window, which is where the dispatch was. Wow. And the dispatcher also seconded at night shift as a jailer. Yeah. I mean, it was bizarre.
Oh, my gosh.
I look back on that and go, how in the world?
Yeah.
One night.
It sounds so safe.
Well, you didn't ask, but I'm going to tell you anyway. On this one night, I mean, I'm in there by myself and dispatching. There's not much going on. All of a sudden, this guy comes walking in, and you know, he looked kind of glazed over, and I'm like, "Can I help you?" You know, and there's just that little bit of glass between us, and he said, had his hands in his pockets, and he said, "Yeah, man, I found this," and he pulls out this hand grenade. Whoa! whoa. And he's got it right there in my face. And he said, I don't know what to do with it, and I said, well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you walk with that hand grenade, walk over there about 30 feet, and I'll make a call, and we'll figure it out, Okay, man, and so he takes off across the garage, and I can see him, so I'm on the radio like, Washington County 7, I've got a code or whatever it is. And so there's blue lights coming in, and so we've got this guy contained, but it's like, so anyway, we kind of talked him into putting it over here and doing all that. Yeah. So that was early on in my career of learning how to de-escalate something, but I did it all on my own.
Was it a NERT? Was it live?
No, it ended up being not a live grenade.
Dummy grenade.
I told him to take it over to Fayetteville PD.
Did you have to change your underwear after that one?
Your first experience of the pucker factor.
Oh, anyway, okay.
Wow.
So anyway, so I did dispatch for mainly on nights too until March. And then back in the day, we had to go to Camden, I'm not going to say what we used to call it, but Camden, Arkansas, it was the only academy in the state at the time. And so how many weeks do they train now, Bill, at the academy?
What is it, either 12 or 14 weeks?
Somewhere in there. I can't remember. It just keeps getting better and better. But then we had to go there and stay there. Yeah. We'd come home on the weekends and then drive back. But my training was a total of 4 weeks. And then I had to get another week of officer survival within 6 months, know. So 5 weeks total training. So went down there, loved every minute of it. I was eat up with law enforcement. I come back to the sheriff's office, and the field training program back then was, hey, Helder, you ride with Hankins tonight. And then you can ride with Roberts tomorrow night. And then on Friday night, you're on your own. I'm like, okay. I'm excited, but I'm scared to death.
And I'm really glad you said that. Marty Boyd, Sheriff Marty Boyd, called me and we were talking about the podcast. And he said, I really want you to do an episode on how the training from when we started back in the day, how it has evolved to what it is now, and you just bring up a great example of how it was.
And you were instrumental in developing some of that in your associations, correct?
Yeah, at my level, for sure. Yeah, at Fayetteville Police Department, and then, of course, even years later, I was at Fayetteville for 22 years, thereabouts, and when I came back to the sheriff's office, they basically still were great organization, don't get me wrong, but in the dark ages as far as policy, training, and so
technology, definitely.
Yeah. Right. So I've had a hand in that, and I'm really happy to have had a part in that. Because if we will fast forward, Bill, from the time that I went on patrol at Washington County and then went to Fayetteville, I went to Fayetteville PD in February of '82. Right. But the determining factors were that I loved the sheriff's office. I loved it. I loved the idea of going out in the county and having the ability to stop and talk to people and, not so busy that you couldn't do that. But here's the deal. We were looked at as a second-class citizen in the law enforcement world, because underfunding. It was like you had to buy your own equipment, you had to buy your own uniforms, and everything looked different. Nobody was uniform in that. And then the training was so subpar. And then let's don't even talk about the pay and retirement. So it was kind of a no-brainer, but I did pass up an opportunity to go to Fayetteville early on because I felt a commitment to the sheriff because he sent me to the academy. And so it cost me about a year in that process. But you and I talked earlier, I wouldn't change any of that for a while.
I didn't mean to jump the gun on what you were going to ask, but I just...
No, that's a great question.
I would say before I jumped from career-wise, but sheriff's office to Fayetteville, March of 1981. So we've had a transition from Herb Marshall to Bud Dennis as the new sheriff. He's just in the saddle for 3 months. I'm a patrolman, and we basically divide the 950 square mile county in half. So somebody's got the north, I've got the south. March. Okay, but you remember the great relationship I had with the West Fork police chief, right? Well, that had evolved. I grew up, and he embraced me, and of course, I lived in West Fork. That's my town, and so we became great friends. In fact, I have a picture of him holding my firstborn, my son, for his first bath. He happened to come by, and that's how that relationship evolved. And then in March, I think it was March 21st, I had took off this night to stay home and watch the Razorbacks. They were playing Louisville.
Good call.
In the tournament.
Good use of your comp time.
Yes. Yeah. Well, during that night, I heard sirens, and of course back then you got scanners and, you just eat up with it. And I jumped up and I called dispatch and I said, hey, what's going on the south end? And they said, Paul Muller's been shot. That's the police chief.
Right.
And I just threw the phone down and went and grabbed my gear and hit my unit and took off. Well, what had happened was that Paul was working late, and he was a big DWI guy. Well, somebody pointed out, hey, there's a car coming south out of Fayetteville that's all over the road, and so he pulled out, got behind it, followed it for about maybe half a mile, and got just on the south end of West Fork on Highway 71, and pulled him over. There were two guys in the car. What Paul didn't know was that the driver, maybe both of them, recently had gotten out of Leavenworth prison, and they had just robbed the Pizza Hut on South School in Fayetteville. They were on a little crime spree, working their way south. Well, he didn't know any of this. He pulls them over. Because you got to remember, guys, no cell phones back then, nothing. I mean, it's just that big whip antenna.
And
that's
your radio works half the time and getting some
you
specific
can
areas.
talk
You had
to
a dead
Florida.
zone right there in that geographic area, too.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, he pulls his car over, and based on how we reconstructed everything, the passenger got out, distracted Paul, and had him over here. Well, then the driver kind of creaked open the door and then shot Paul dead center in the chest. Well, Paul was able to get off a shot, and he got the passenger and then got another round off into the trunk lid of the car as it was taken off. And so now we'll kind of go back to me. I had gotten my car, and this was just about 3/4 mile from my house. I pulled up, and there's already a deputy on scene giving CPR to Paul, and then I've got the guy in the ditch, and we get him wrapped up. And so Paul died. I mean, it basically, no vests back then, and it was a .44 Magnum that he shot him with. So, we went from being arch enemies to best friends, and then, I got to experience that whole mess. And then there was a 3-day manhunt. This guy was like a survivalist type guy. Well, he piled off out of that car. It ran out of gas, and about another mile down the road. And he went off the bluff, through the river, and into the wilderness. Because, the south end of Washington County is very remote. And I just told you that we just had very limited means of communication. But man, everybody starts swarming in. As you can imagine, officers from across the state, from surrounding states, state police, FBI, everybody is showing up. And Bud Dennis sets up a command post, which is his car, right there in West Fork at an old filling station. And for 3 days, he never went home. He sat right there. And none of us went home. Okay, 3 days. Think about that. And what we were chasing, a lot of the normal leads, but what was happening in rural Washington County, people would call in and they would go, I don't know if I should be bothering you or not, but I know when I went to work today, I closed my cabinet door above the sink. It may be nothing. So we would chase down those things. Well, you know what? Pretty soon it became a pattern. What this guy was doing was he was breaking into homes that were unsecured, and he would go in and eat, and then he'd hit the road again.
Interesting.
So we started kind of really believing that we still had him in this net somehow. So on the third day, John Schuster, do you remember the guy that was riding with me in the Duster?
Yes.
He became a police officer at Fayette.
Of course he
My
did.
best friend. And so he was with a.
You stepped up from the Duster.
I
right?
know,
Yeah.
right? I know.
John Schuster, thank you for your service.
Oh yeah. Well, you have no idea. So he, John, I was assigned to a mounted patrol deal going up Lees Creek. Chasing down leads in that area, and John was assigned to two posse members, volunteers, and they were chasing down these leads, where people were calling in. Well, this one particular house down in a community called Bethlehem, south and east of West Fork, out in the middle of nowhere, they called in and said, my Frosted Flakes box was, it was 3/4 full, now it's half full. I don't know what's going on.
Wow.
So they were just, and guys, they get a little lackadaisical, as you know, after a while chasing these leads down. Well, on this particular place, it was a cabin, like I said, in the middle of nowhere. Front door's unlocked. So John makes entry. He's the one certified officer. The two guys stay outside. And he kind of peeks around. And fortunately, he had his gun drawn, just kind of looking around. Well, he saw like a box of cereal and a bowl on the deal. And, well, right in front of him, there's a wall, and then like one of those ladders that's attached to the wall, and then an opening,
A little loft
in the ceiling.
Okay.
So he thought, well, I'll check it. So he climbed up there, and he had a baseball cap on, and he did the old stuck his cap up there. Nobody shot it, so it must be okay. So he peered up over the edge of that thing, and something rustled, and he turned around. Well, it was a cat, walking across, and he thought, oh. And so he let his guard down. He went ahead and climbed up in there. Well, when I talk about a loft, Kevin, it's probably 4 foot at the height of this thing, and then it peels down at an angle. And right next to the opening, there was one of those clothes hanger roller things right there. So John, he got up there 1 foot, 2 foot. The roller deal is right here, and he's crouched over because you got to remember. Right. So he's pointing this way, and then he hears freeze. And John was really a great athlete, and he's young. We're young, and without that, he would have been dead. Okay, but he automatically spun, and when he did, the guy shot, and they're closer than you and I are right now. They're touching.
Wow.
And the guy shot him and spun John around, hit him in the shoulder, and now they're right here, toe to toe. And John's first round clicks. The chamber, it just clicked. Talk about that in a minute. You'll remember why. And then 4 rounds, he squeezed off in succession, shot the guy 4 times, and it clicked on the 6th one as well. And then the guy's got a .44 Magnum, don't forget, but it's a Blackhawk that you have to cock, single action, fortunately. And by then, the guy shoots him again and hits him in the thigh, and it knocks him back down through, or he dove back through that whole 8 foot onto the ground. And I don't want to prolong this any longer, but anyway, John was able to get out of there. The troops arrive. We get John to the hospital. They shoot tear gas up in there and kind of catch the house on fire. And when they got him out, John had shot him with those 4 rounds, but one of them had penetrated right through his shirt pocket, through a New Testament Bible.
Wow.
Killed him. That it went right through his heart. But, that was for a lot of reasons, it was such a traumatic time. But as I think back on that whole situation, I think back about my growing up. I think about my relationship with John Schuster, who lived with me our whole senior year. We were more like brothers. He was with me when I got arrested. He got into law enforcement. I got into law enforcement. We all became friends with Paul. Paul ends up getting killed. John ends up confronting the killer,
Right.
killing the killer, getting shot. And, you can't make this stuff up.
No.
Wow,
So that was my early breaking in law
Yeah.
enforcement. I was still in my first year.
Mm.
And but Paul Mueller was a great guy, great dad, and what a mess. But then John survived, and we can talk for an hour about how that was mishandled, his recovery and all that kind of stuff. But I'll leave it to you to ask questions. This is your show. I'm kind of commandeering it.
Hey, no, that's why you're sitting in the chair. No, that's a great story. Thank you. So he got shot several times. Just real quick, his recovery. Did he fully recover from those injuries after being shot by the suspect? And how long did that take?
Yeah.
The
So,
pain and the-
physically, I'd say yes. He was a heck of an athlete. I'm telling you, this guy, just a great guy. But Bill, and I know that we've evolved in law enforcement to understand trauma, post-traumatic stress disorders and all that stuff from incidents. But back then, what did we do?
You suck it up.
It was a matter of pride, and it's just what we did. Put your boots on, get back out there, pat them on the hind end, go get them, soldier. And so John was in the hospital rehabbing for quite a while, as you can imagine. But boy, I mean, he really was just barely cleared medically, and they put him back out, and he wasn't ready. And I think he was a perfect example of how wrong that we had it back then. That he turned to other vices, whether it be alcohol or whatever. I'm not going to get into all that, but it cost him dearly. His sacrifice for our community, his sheer heroism was not dealt with correctly, and his life, was in shambles forever. And fast forward, 20 years, then he came to work for me at the sheriff's office and had another little stint of a career, and he's retired now and doing okay.
Good.
But, it was just,
wow.
it just wasn't we didn't have it figured out back then.
We didn't know what we didn't know at the time, but that was the mentality. You were trained not to, don't bring it home, don't talk to your family, just suck it up, buttercup, and as you say, put your boots back on, let's go to work, And we often wondered why there were, no wonder so many people self-medicated to try to ease the emotional pain and so forth. And
they didn't even know why.
Yeah, they didn't even know why.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You mentioned the support system, though. Is how important the support system is.
I think it's very important, and it's not even I think we're in the first step of recognizing the trauma that law enforcement officers go through. I was researching one piece of information that the average citizen throughout their life, goes through, 2 or 3 major critical incidents in their life. A law enforcement officer who has been working for 20 years, let's say, will deal with up to 300 to 500. And again, we tell them, okay, briefing's over, hit the streets.
Right.
And so I think we're at the point where we're recognizing that we're not where we need to be,
Right.
and also there has to be a certain amount of emotional compartmentalization and toughness that you have to have. Some officers are really good at it, and some aren't. But we're slowly starting to recognize that. Let's give them a break. Maybe that complaint that just came in was a direct result of what the person dealt with for the last 6 weeks or whatever it might be. So, so at least we have some law enforcement leaders that are at least talking about that. Going back to Fayetteville PD, you worked investigations and became the deputy chief, or deputy chief. What was that like after working cases? You touched on that a little bit, and did you eventually embrace that opportunity of change and molding younger officers through mentorship, leadership, discipline, setting examples, and so forth? How did you come to grip with that?
Yeah. So when I went to work at Fayetteville, I was a patrolman for like 4 years, and then maybe 3, and then they put me in the detective division, which I really loved, and I thrived in there. But I don't know. It wasn't that I always wanted to be, climbing the ladder. It was something ingrained in me, just competitiveness. I don't know really what it was, but I always wanted to. If the test was available, I was taking it. And if it was, and you know, that's when I started second guessing myself on, am I doing the right thing? You know, and so I would, after a year in CID, I promoted to sergeant, and then they move you back to patrol. And then within 6 months or a year, I was back in CID, kind of running the unit. And man, did we have fun. Because back then, I'm sorry, I'm digressing, but
No.
you got to remember law enforcement back then, we had like 2 old guys in CID and they read reports basically. You know what I mean? And there wasn't any initiative or anything. And here I am, not even 30 yet. And man, how old was I? I was probably 26 or something. And I'm running the detective division at Fayetteville Police Department. And we had a new chief come in, Richard Watson, who was kind of progressive in his own way. But what he did was he trusted me and he let me do things. You know, like I started up a narcotics unit. I started up, you know, we started doing aggressive, use your common sense and initiative and go investigate.
Let's
you
get
know?
out of the office, boys.
It was so much fun. I can't tell you. And through all that, we ended up partnering with the DEA and just stuff that had never happened there. Okay. So anyway, promoted again. 2 years later, I promoted to lieutenant, took a test, and went back to patrol. And that's the call that I made with my dad. And I said, I'm miserable. You know, he said, get over yourself, Buttercup, you know, and get in there and make a difference, you know. And but that resonated with me, you know. It was tough love kind of deal, but it made sense to me. It clicked. And that's when I really fell in love with leadership and the opportunities that we have. If you'll go all the way back to when I said I wanted to go be an educator, well, you know why? It's because these people, these leaders had invested in me without me really knowing it. But when you start reflecting on your life, it's like, I want to be that guy. I want to help people.
Yeah.
And so I took it seriously, and then kind of really started studying leadership and trying to be a better leader and watching people and, you know, looking at the bad ones, looking at the good ones, and somewhere in the middle, that's where you want to fall out.
Right.
But, and then go ahead.
So you get, let's just say you get a phone call from the sheriff at the time, as you're a deputy chief for Fayetteville PD, asking you to come and work for him.
Well, you know, at Fayetteville, so I went from patrol to admin lieutenant, which was basically, I was stuck there for 10 years because there only above me there was a deputy chief and chief. Well, back then somebody had to die, you know, or retire. So in 2002, that happened. You know, there was a retirements and stuff going on, and I was able to promote to deputy chief, and basically doing the same job I've been doing for 10 years. But the chief that had been in there, the one I was talking to you about, Rick Hoyt, a good friend and mentor of mine, was always one step in front of me. We were always running the department. We were, you know, like Chief Watson he'd come in the morning and he'd say, "You guys got it." And he'd be gone all day, you know, and we were doing all this stuff, and we'd gripe and complain about it. But, you know, I think that's what made us who we are, because we basically, without us knowing it, he was developing us to become
training
leaders.
right there.
Okay, I'm sorry, I digress. So in 2003, I had been deputy chief for like 6 or 8 months. And Steve Whitmill, who was the sheriff at the time, his chief deputy, Hollis Spencer, was a legend in law enforcement, passed away with cancer. And so Steve called me and asked if I'd consider meeting with him about something. I didn't know what at the time. And so I went over and sat down, and just out of the blue, he said, "I'd like for you to, I know that you can retire," because I was on the old close plan, 20 years. And he said, "I'd like for you to come over and be my chief," you know. And so we had lengthy conversation and about that. And I loved the sheriff's office, but I also knew that there was potential that I could be the next chief at Fayetteville. No guarantees. And so I had that to think about. But I also had a son that was in college. We were building a house, and I had 2 kids coming up behind. And this was an opportunity to double dip, so to speak. So Holly and I, you know, we spent a lot of time on our knees on that, as in other things. But we really felt like God was opening a door for us, for whatever reason, to help us financially, but also to have an opportunity. Remember, I was talking about where the sheriff's office was? Steve had brought the sheriff's office forward, but it wasn't anywhere near it needed to be. And he explained that to me. He told me why he was reaching out to me, and it was to do those things. So we pulled the trigger and went over to the sheriff's office, and I got a commitment from him that he was going to do his 5 terms, the 10 years. And I thought, well, that's awesome because I can get a second retirement and we can both ride off into the sunset. Well, so I started doing all the things he wanted me to do. Policy development, internal process that they didn't have, just a lot of stuff. And 1 year, almost to the day, he called me in his office and he said, hey, I know I told you I was going to be here for 10 years, but Tyson called me and they want me to head up their global security division, just developed, after the 9/11 attacks. I really had to restrain myself from jumping over the desk and choking him to death right there because I had dropped everything for a 10-year commitment from this guy. And man, my head's swimming and I'm going, what in the world am I going to do? And he said, I'll tell you what you're going to do. You're either going to run for sheriff or you're going to hunt for another job. And he said, in my opinion, you're not done doing what you need to do here. And I was like, Steve, I don't like you right now, and I'm going to go home, and we're going to figure something out. But so again, we hit our knees, and you know Holly, but Holly, man, she grounds me. You know what I mean? And she's the common sense, and so we really, based on our faith, we feel like God puts us in different situations, positions for a reason, and that's to point others to Him. And we just felt like this would not be happening if it wasn't supposed to happen. Sure. And so we jumped in, man. Didn't know what the heck. Actually, this was not my first run for public office, by the way.
Really?
Yeah. I ran for school board in West Fork and won by, I don't know, not very many votes. Yeah. But it was a big turnout, and I learned how to campaign in the hills of Washington County all the way back then.
Had a little background. And if I could interject
sure.
For Kevin's sake and the viewers, I mean, the reason his head is spinning when he hears this, back then and even today potentially, a new sheriff that comes in sometimes brings his own staff in.
Oh, sure.
So, I mean, the sheriff leaves, he's out of a job.
Right.
So he's got family commitments, house payments, car payments, raising kids, college, and hearing this commitment, I'm here for 10 years, I'm going to give up this career. So you can tell why potentially he's at the
Little nervous.
oh my goodness moment.
Yeah.
So wow.
It was nerves, but I'm not gonna lie, I was angry as well. But anyway, because I got to promise you, kind of going back to Fayetteville, I never aspired to be other than the best I could be. And whatever that was, I it wasn't like, okay, my dad was a lieutenant, I'm going to be a captain. I want to, it wasn't that. It was just, I don't know. It's like, I sure never planned on being sheriff ever in my life. And, but you know what? I feel like God put me there, and wow. What an honor, and it just worked out.
Yeah. A campaign is it's a toll that your family is also involved in, and we touched on how amazing Holly was and is in your life, but behind every great man is a greater woman. For
you know
sure.
what?
I can
that's
say
true
that about Karen.
No, that's true. Your wife's great, and every sheriff's got a great wife. But I've got a mother-in-law that continually, when somebody says that, she just stands behind me and goes, I have no idea how he's successful. You know what I mean? It's just like so behind every good woman, there's a mother-in-law.
Yeah. Well, and again, with me too, I mean, if you think about it, the mother-in-law is, they molded your wife.
We were driving down the road one time, Bill, and this is no lie. Holly and Shirley, my mother-in-law, were in the back seat, and I was driving, and Rex, my father-in-law, was in the front, and we drove by this construction crew, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. I'd won my election, that first one, like 88% or something.
You're on cloud
I
nine.
was like, man, I'm something. And so we were talking about that, and she said, Tim, you see that flagman right there? And I said, yeah, what about him? And she said, if Holly'd married him, he'd be sheriff now and you'd be flagging traffic.
There's an element of accuracy to that, probably.
She's spot on, man, because without Holly,
yeah.
I mean, let me tell you,
Yeah.
I tell people, God saved my soul, but she saved my life.
I
She
hear you.
came to me at just the right moment.
And Kevin, early on in my career as sheriff, and I didn't know any of the sheriffs and so forth, and kind of like you, I never really wanted to be sheriff. I never thought in the wildest dreams that I'd be the sheriff of Sebastian County or even want to run for sheriff. But because of certain circumstances, and it happens.
Sure.
And one of the most important things or one of the most important assets, I would say, with the being sheriff is the Arkansas Sheriff's Association. And what I would see as sheriff, that in the old school of the Sheriff's Association, they would hire these attractive women to come to your county. And then the sitting sheriff would assign 3 or 4 deputies to drive these ladies around to collect money for the Sheriff's Association, to buy ads in this publication that the sheriff's office would push out, and the publication was interesting. It had safety and what to do tips and things of that nature. Interesting articles every now and then, but it took these deputies off the street, and you're sending armed law enforcement officers to collect money, which I always had a problem with. And so my first thought is I'm not going to have anything to do with the Arkansas Sheriff's Association. I don't like what I've seen.
Tactics.
I don't like it at all. And it was just a big party that they would do, once or twice a year in Little Rock or so forth. And so I'm rocking on kind of like you on cloud nine. I was elected, and lo and behold, I get a phone call from Tim Helder. I don't know if you remember that call or not. So I'll just let you kind of
well, we may have different
views. Oh, sure.
Remembrance of that phone call, but Bill and I knew each other. We had met each other through former sheriffs, and I was so excited when he was elected because I don't know how to put this, but most sheriff's offices, they're kind of where we were in 2004 and 5. That they're just kind of a little behind the curve. Okay. Not their fault, but it's just the levels of experience and training and professionalism were lacking in a lot of areas. But I knew Bill was a professional and would bring something very credible, not just to Sebastian County, but if we could get him involved with the Sheriff's Association, to the association itself. So I called him, and
it's called integrity.
I called him and basically built him up.
Yeah.
I got his head swelled.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then I said,
yeah.
now, Bill, you've got to come help me. And he said, well, I just don't like that magazine thing. And I said, I don't like it either, but we got to figure it out. We got to work with what we got, and then we'll figure out a way. And eventually it did work itself out. I don't know if you want
to. It did, and he was shortly, or either was the president or was about to become the president. I can't recall of the association. Yeah, when I was elected. And
what year was that?
2010, 2011. Yeah, I started in 2011 or won the election in 2010.
That was the year.
Okay.
Or no, weren't you on the board though? Whenever
I was on
all
the
this
board.
happened, so it would have been
just maybe a couple years afterwards.
Yeah.
Or so. But the association was in financial trouble.
Sure.
And Tim brought this vision to the sheriffs, and you have to understand that you had like about 5 counties that were departments that had the manpower, the resources, and then the rest of the counties were amazing sheriffs getting by with very little financial assistance, ability to give their people training and so forth, and Tim recognized that and kind of reimagined the sheriff's office in a way that it could be a powerful tool for legislation. It could be a powerful tool to assist the sheriffs in leadership skill set training and so forth.
Right.
and brought that vision to the association. But the most important thing, I mean, what a good leader does is produces his vision and then has the ability to project that vision onto other people to get buy-in. And he had this uncanny ability to do that and change the association from a great party down in Little Rock to a leadership based association that was an asset for all the sheriffs throughout the state of Arkansas. Also, it increased the credibility of all the sheriffs. So when we went to Little Rock to get specific legislation,
Sure.
when we walked into the legislators walking in, they look up and they see all these sheriffs showing up. That's a powerful message, and we were able to pass some really good public safety legislation, and a lot of credit goes to Tim Helder. So don't get your head too big, but that's the truth. And again, he had this vision that he just didn't just with the Sheriff's Association. I mean, I was great at stealing stuff that he would invent. You know, the leadership training that you brought within your department. You know, you brought outside sources in, and it was amazing to see his thought process of, well, how do you get great leaders? Well, we got a lieutenant. Well, why don't we start at the most rookie deputy? That's when you develop them. And he started this really cool online training program, from what I recall, and would bring in speakers. And boy, did I have a great person to steal great ideas from. So, and I really appreciate that.
I didn't invent anything. I might have reinvented,
You
maybe
probably
massaged
reinvented
it, but
so
Well, you both saw a need and filled it to the best of your abilities.
exactly. So
thank you for saying that.
hey, it's been a great conversation. I really appreciate
But I
you
got a lot
coming
more
down.
to say.
And I know you
Absolutely.
do. I know you
Gosh.
do. So let's take a quick break.
Oh, he'll be
okay?
back.
Oh,
Let's take a quick break, and we'll start over again. Don't forget, if you like this content, please like and subscribe to the Bill Hollenbeck Beyond the Badge channel.
and I did become president. Of course, you know everything that happened, but I ended up spending about every week in Little Rock trying to get that thing going. But we ended up hiring good leadership
Yes, we
and took us in a whole different direction. And we turned it from what you called the party time to basically a leadership training event every time we were there. Not that you couldn't let your hair down and relax, because a lot of these guys, you got to remember,
That's all. That's
these
their
small
vacation.
sheriffs, that's it. That's the only time they can leave town.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't want to make it so rigorous that they don't come or don't enjoy it, but you can do both. And I
Right.
think we proved that. And it's such a great organization because of guys like you and Ron Brown, you know, who gave of their time. And I just can't ever help but think of Jay Winters, but then
Yeah.
Marty Boyd
Yeah.
and just
Yeah. All
great
those-
sheriffs
And
getting
our
involved.
directors, you know.
Yeah,
You
the
know,
directors have been
yeah,
phenomenal
they
for
have
sure.
been. They
Scott
sure
does a
have.
wonderful
Yeah,
job.
he does. He does. So you made the decision finally, after many years of public service, to seek peace, probably, you know, and retire. Just real quick, what drew you towards retirement, and what advice would you give, not just to sheriffs, but any law enforcement officer on prepping for retirement?
Yeah. Basically, I got out with a full head of hair.
Yes,
Yeah, not
you
many,
did.
not many do that. You know, you get
Yeah.
scalped somewhere
Right,
along the way.
Right, you do.
So in total, I did 43 and a half years of law enforcement, 18 as sheriff, and 22 years total at the sheriff's office. I had this was kind of an aha moment for me, but I had a captain that was working for me, and, you know, he was thriving. Everybody liked him. He was doing a good job. Everything was great. And then one day he came in and said, "Hey, I think I'm gonna retire at the end of the month." And I said, "Do what?" You know, and,
Excuse me?
and I said, "What's
can't do
going
that.
on? Are you all
Yeah,
right? Is your
yeah,
health okay?" And he
right.
said, "Everything's great." And I said, "Well, why are you retiring?" He said, "It's just time, you know." And I said, "Can you expand on that a little bit?" And he said, I don't know how to tell you, but when the time comes, you just know." And I said, "Richard, I'm not geared that way. You know, I kind of plan." And so, you know, time rocked along, and then I got into what would end up being my final term. And it was our first 4-year term, by the way. And I'll never forget it, man. About midway, I woke up one morning and I looked over at Holly and I said, I don't want to go to work. I mean, I honestly, something's changed. And she was like, what are you talking about? And I said, you remember that conversation I had with Richard? And he said, I said, I think that light switch just got flipped, because I'm telling you, you talked about my time of service and the 18 years, the longest serving prior to me was 10. And I would look at that board and I'd say, 10 years, I'm in my 12th. I could do this forever. I could do it standing on my head. I love doing this. But from that moment on, it was like, it's time for me to go for a number of reasons. Right. It wasn't that I hated what I was doing and all that, but I knew it was my time to move on and let somebody else take over.
As your lieutenant said, when you know. Somebody once told me that same phrase as well.
And it's hard to explain to somebody because you don't go through it until you go through it. But anyway, back to your question, you were talking about, well, what's the process like? How do you prepare? What would you advise others? Well, I had somebody tell me one time years ago, before you retire, you make sure that you're involved in something outside of law enforcement. Right. So I've always done that. Church involvement, community involvement, coaching kids.
Right.
Whatever. Sang with a quartet for 16 years. Yeah. Just, it's just a lot of things where you can get outside and away from law enforcement because that can carry over and it will carry over.
It sustains you too.
It does. Yeah. But you got to develop hobbies and you need to develop hobbies that you can do with your wife and your family and things of that nature. But here's what I did. Somebody told me to do this and I did. They said, go find somebody that from your perspective is successful in retirement and talk to them and talk to 2 or 3 of them and find out, like, why are you happy? What did you do to prepare? Blah, 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 blah. The first and foremost, it was, if you think you can ever afford to retire, you forget it. It's kind of like having kids. You can't afford it. You just do it and work it out. But he said, what I just told you, you got to develop hobbies that will carry on beyond work and make sure that you're done. Don't retire if it's because you've drawn a line in the sand and, I've got 22.3 years in and my retirement, blah, blah, blah. He said, forget all that. You got to know that it's time. If not, you're going to be miserable. You'll be one of those guys sits in his chair and collapses dead of a heart attack, or you're going to get bored and go back doing a job that you never wanted to do, just to do it. So, my advice is to listen to your inner self, but prepare prior to the time of that hitting to develop those hobbies and habits and outside involvement so that it's a natural transition, And for me, I never thought I could live without it, but I'm going to tell you, I have not, other than the people, I have not missed it, not one day. I mean, it's like it was time for me to go, and I went.
When
and I went.
My father-in-law once told me right after he retired was he never knew, he didn't understand how he had time to work because if you do it right, you're busy. You have things to do, and that is so true.
You're busy, but you're busy doing things you didn't have time to do before, things you wanted to do. I tell people I had 250,000 bosses when I worked. Right. But the one I've got now is much more demanding.
Yeah, so true. People say, well, what are you going to do when you're retired? And the answer is, whatever I want to do.
And whatever she tells me.
And what she allows me.
And what she allows. There you go. Absolutely.
They have to kind of join.
They sure do. They sure do. So, hey, man, this has just been an awesome conversation. Again, one of my mentors coming up as sheriff and you welcomed me with open arms, and some of the people at the association would call us the three amigos. Ron Brown, myself, and you, and so forth, and we just seemed to click together, and that's what I meant.
Yeah,
from being sheriff. Not
those road trips.
Absolutely, yeah. We had a couple.
You didn't let Ron drive.
We had a couple fun road trips. Yeah, we had a great time in
you
New
let
Orleans
him
one
drive?
time. Would he let me drive?
No, you let Ron drive?
Well, yeah.
He's got a history.
Yeah, after his stories. Yeah, I think usually it was Tim that was driving.
Okay.
So yeah,
but I'm the responsible one.
That's absolutely. we had fun. We had a lot of good times together, and I hope that we get to have some more good times together.
Absolutely.
As
We've been
as
talking about a
old-
Canada trip
I
for a
know
long
it.
time.
We're gonna have to pull the trigger and go catch some small.
Maybe
jaws
when
up in
Marty
Canada.
retires.
Yeah, well, this is his time now.
That's what I
so-
hear.
So I'm excited for Marty. So
Yeah.
anyway, hey, thank you again for coming down. We
My
appreciate
pleasure.
you. God bless
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you very much.
Kevin,
Have
thanks.
fun in retirement. And I want to thank everyone again for jumping in and tuning in to Bill Hollenbeck's Beyond the Badge. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. And a big thank
buy a
you.
book. Don't
There-
forget to
and
buy a
buy
book.
a book. There you go.
Buy 2 books.
Yeah. And a big thank you to my co-host Kevin Jones, who does so much work behind the scenes to make this podcast happen.
I'm behind the badge.
Yeah, he's behind and beyond the badge. And again, thanks a lot from the Sound Collection Lab here at the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith. I hope you guys have a blessed week.
Hey,
I'll see misdemeanor site.
10-4 12. Side the office.
10-4, hey, can you 911? Outside.
Okay, on my way. Adam 8 1035 Mary.
Joe Mary, can you show us up with 925 Adam? Halldale, Rosecrans.
925 Adam, Halldale Rosecrans.
11 Donald, what's the warrant for?
It's for 4116 DW David Williams.